Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the outstanding work of this year's DGA Documentary Award nominees. I'm Alex Stapleton, and I'm speaking to you tonight on behalf of my co-chairs, James Mole and Marina Zinovich, and all the members of the DGA Documentary Committee. The committee was established in 2020 to represent the interest of all documentary filmmakers and to strengthen our community. We work closely with the DGA staff to bolster the labor agreements that protect us. If you'd like to hear more about the benefits and the protections that come with a part of being with the DGA, please reach out to the DGA staff representative for documentaries, Jennifer Peet. Her contact info will be dropped in the Zoom chat. Tonight, I consider it an honor to welcome these 8 extraordinary filmmakers for a discussion about the craft of documentary filmmaking. This year's nominated films represent a diverse group of filmmakers and subjects. Each documentary paints a vivid picture of our world, transporting us across different cultures and worlds. They delve into the core of global politics, the chaos of war, the intricacies of fatherhood and incarceration, and a powerful investigation sparking a community awakening. Each one of these films is a vital historical document and also a work of art. And before we go any further, a big thank you to our fellow DGA documentarians who gave so generously of their time by agreeing to be a part of the judging panel to review and vote on the films for this year's awards. Your host tonight is an accomplished filmmaker in her own right. She is a Grammy-nominated and Emmy-winning director and producer who generates bold, explosive art that shines light on important stories hidden from view. From executive producing the Academy Award-winning Precious to producing and directing the enthralling documentary Little Richard, I Am Everything, she continues to spark cultural change through works of unrivaled excellence. Her films include All In, The Fight for Democracy, which traces the violent history of the voting rights struggle, and Invisible Beauty, the documentary about Black fashion industry pioneer Bethann Hardison. In the Emmy-winning HBO documentary, The Apollo, she explores African-American cultural and political history through the story of the legendary Apollo Theater. And most recently, she directed and produced The Space Race, about the gripping saga of African-American astronauts at NASA and in space. A member of the documentary branch and of the Academy of Motion Picture and Sciences and the DGA, please welcome your host of our event, Lisa Cortes.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for that warm welcome. I wish you could travel everywhere with me. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a really exciting time to be in conversation with these incredible filmmakers. I do want to note, though, that many in our community who live in California have been adversely affected by the fires. And in the chat, we're going to drop information for Jennifer Peet, the Special Assignments Executive, who is working with the DGA's Wildfire Resource Assistance, and members can reach out to Jennifer. And also thanks and gratitude to Jennifer and Michelle for all of your work in making this evening happen. So before we meet our nominees, let's take a look at a clip reel so that you can become familiar with their works. Welcome back, everyone. I am excited to be in community and conversation with these exceptional filmmakers. Let me introduce them to you. Brendan Bellomo and Slava Leontyev, Porcelain War.
Hello, Lisa. Hi.
Hello. Ibrahim Nash'at, Hollywoodgate.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi. Johan Grimonprez, soundtrack to a coup d'etat.
Hello. Oh.
Julian Brave Noisecat and Emily Kassie, Sugarcane. And last but not least, Angela Patton and Natalie Rae daughters.
Greetings, everyone.
Hey guys, nice to see you all.
Lovely to see everyone. So we're going to jump into the water. And I thank you all for your time. I know that you are dialing in from different time zones around the world, and we appreciate your joining us tonight. So let's start with Angela and Natalie, because I understand that your film was 8 years in the making. For both of you, it's your first feature. Where did the impetus come from? How did you guys come together?
Yeah, well, actually, 10 years ago now, my best friend had sent me Angela's TED Talk, and I just remember how the emotional resonance with that moment was so strong. I don't think I'd ever come across something like that that just like shook my soul and whole body. And for many reasons, right? These girls, this idea that our fathers are a mirror and our relationship with our father is going to impact everything for the rest of our lives, I think really made me think about all girls growing up, what access they have to them, the relationship, and how universal that idea was. And then hearing that these girls with incarcerated fathers that have to deal with this separation and potentially this anger and sadness and loneliness, when Angela said, "What do you want to do to connect with their fathers?" They said, "Let's have a dance, let's have a party." And I was like, wow, this is the type of emotional, maturity and wisdom that could bring so much to the world, and was so inspired. So I hit up Angela and begged her to have a coffee with me. And so grateful that she did.
Yeah.
Angela, and can you talk about the process of gaining trust from both the fathers and the daughters?
Yes. The process is trusting and patience. I would say that it will work out in the end. But because there is a program connected that would allow the girls that actually have their own sessions and the fathers in the group with Chad as the fatherhood coach, we both fortunately are trained youth development coordinators and also trained in family unification. And so Chad and I, who is featured in the film, are a really great tag team. And so we've done this work for over 20 years. And I believe, during the time that Natalie had reached out to me, we kind of had our flow. And so this was probably the 13th Date with Dad program. And I believe that how I really gain it is from experience, from learning, being an active listener, but also understanding that it takes time. So this 8-year journey that Natalie and I went on to make the film was not odd to me, because it can take years for my community that are in my program to feel as though they fit in and that they're heard and that they're included in co-creating these spaces with them and with us together. And so you really have to get out of your own way, just like I tell the mothers in the film. I have to do the same thing and really just continue to show up, right? And just allow them to understand that we're in this together. And the goal is for us all to win. And you really have to be a person that understands what it means not to have a scarcity mindset and more of an abundance to show up that way, because you can get a little worried about if this is even worth your time. And I believe that all of these girls that are in this film and girls in the community that I work with are worth every minute of it.
Great. Brendan, Slava, I saw you shaking your head in agreement. Can you kind of share with us about, Brendan, you mentioned in the pre-call that you came from a narrative background, how you connected with Slava for Porcelain War?
Well, our connection began many years ago. Actually, it turns out one of our producers grew up under Russian oppression in communist Poland, and she discovered Anya and Slava's work about 8 years ago. And it moved her so deeply because it really reminded her of her home. And the four of us actually connected as two couples, Aniela and I, husband and wife, Slava and Anya, porcelain artists in Ukraine. And we began to collaborate on an animation project. And then Russia invaded. I called up Slava and I said, are you guys okay? When are you leaving? And he said, we're going to stay. We're going to keep making art at night. And I said, what are you doing during the day? And I learned for the very first time he was in the Ukrainian Special Forces. He was training peaceful people who did not want to fight, but felt they had no other choice to pick up weapons. And we felt there was this amazing act of resistance because Slava felt there was so much important news coverage, but it was a perspective from the outside. And so we really wanted to empower Slava and Anya to be able to tell their own story. So we worked to get cameras into Ukraine. I was actually a makeup artist in New Jersey who was moving medical supplies, and she said, I'll bring the cameras there. But at the time, we were separated by 6,000 miles. We were separated by languages. We didn't speak the same language. We were in different time zones. They were in a war zone, and we didn't know how to begin. But when we got the cameras there, we figured out a way for them to translate their artistic instincts into cinema. We set up an impromptu film school over Zoom, just like this. And Slava and our cinematographer, Andrei, what they learned to capture became Porcelain War.
Slava, you're an artist. You are working with civilians, and you are being called upon to become a filmmaker. What was that like for you?
It was really surrealistic experience, but it's surrealistic experience to have the war right outside your door. I was surprised when Brendan called me, but really it was amazing opportunity to share our experience as artists and as everyday people who came to army to save their homes and their families, and maybe even more important, we felt a kind of responsibility in the face of history, because this battle is battle between democracy and totalitarian. And this front line is not in Ukraine only. Our story is not about Ukraine and Ukrainians only. And from the very beginning, we understood what we can film, because all war looks same, all destruction looks same, and it's senseless to film something like a news footage, because news gets old quickly. And much more important to show what may be destroyed because this war. And we were focused on beauty, especially on beauty people around us, who try, everyday civilian people who are able to defend democracy, to develop culture and preserve their humanity even in darkest of times. Because our responsibility as artists and filmmakers is bring hope and inspiration.
Thank you. Johan, how many years did you work on soundtrack to a coup d'etat? And what was the impetus for the project?
Well, yeah, it's about normal 7 years, 5 years, 2 years writing, 4 years editing. And the writing happens in the editing. Of course, you stumble on two little pearls in the archive research as well. But the impetus was being born in Belgium and being kept ignorant about this whole situation, which actually is so relevant still today. 1 week ago, Goma was invaded by M23. And so some of the characters come from that province. And yesterday we had at the People's Forum a screening, and some people were telling me that their uncle had died last week. So it's so timely. What was set in motion by my country, because it's about a black page out of the history of my country. It's colonial history, which is so intertwined with the history of my country. Set in motion something, with the independence, when subsequently that with the first democratically elected premier, there was sort of a neo-colonial grab of how the West was about to deal with its riches of that country. And subsequently were assassinating Patrice Lumumba, and my country was involved, and the monarchy was involved, and it's trying to come to terms with that story, and a story that is not told at school, a story that is wiped under the carpet in our country. So, and it's very timely because it's sort of, it's still the same situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always say the past is a prelude, unfortunately, to this moment that we're in. But I think the moment can be very challenging, but we can also find inspiration from the past.
Right. That's what
Ibrahim,
James.
sorry, Johan?
I know. I just wanted to quote James Baldwin, who said, we're not the past. We are made up, from the past, but it's the present. That's what we made from. So, yeah, accurately said. Yeah.
Ibrahim, I read this wonderful. Okay, so in preparing for tonight, not only have I seen your film several times, but I love reading the press notes because I learn a lot about all of you. And there was a quote, Ibrahim, from your producer, Talal, and I'm going to give the abridged version. You guys were talking about you going on this journey, making this film, and it was challenging for you. At any time you were in such a precarious situation, who knows what could have happened to you. And he said, the film will last forever. Cinema always wins. So can you tell us about where you were in your journey with Hollywoodgate when he gave you this inspiration?
I think he gave me this really, really early on. We were talking a lot about how can I deal with my emotions when I'm there being on my own with the camera and watching what's happening around me and not having to comment or react physically, emotionally, or show any response to what's happening, to what's ever going in front of me. And it was completely unknown what I'm gonna face, but what was important is that I had to contain my emotions and contain myself. So he's giving me this incredible idea of that when things gets really hard, you got to look into your monitor and focus on what you're filming, because what you're filming is something that's gonna last for so long. Your emotion that you're dealing with at that moment is something that you will be able to deal with later. Typical dissociation technique that I learned later in the therapy that kept going with me for a very long time afterwards. But it is true that every frame we recorded in this mission became important because no other cameraman is allowed at the moment to be among the Taliban's, nor I think they would let anyone in. And again, it was we were lucky and blessed to be there at the right time and the right moment before things become as they are today or as they have been for the past 2 years. And we always say I always say if I arrived literally 10 days later to Afghanistan, I would have never gotten such an access.
And when you arrived, if I understand correctly, your fixer was not there, your translator was not there. So how did you proceed?
I think the moment I got into Afghanistan, the fixer who was supposed to work with me has bailed on me, and I was there standing with a translator that is actually a Taliban that the fixer has set me up with, and I was there. So I had two choices, either to freak out and leave or just try to figure out something with the fixer that I'm with the translator that I'm with. And I was like, I got here, so I've got to try. Things were quite hard in the beginning, especially that I realized quickly that the translator that I'm working with is a Taliban, but he's not an important political member of the Taliban, so they didn't care about him. And I quickly realized how they play politics because of the way they were dealing with someone that looks to be figuratively like a big figure, and religiously, this translator was like a Maulawi, like a big religious scholar, but for them it didn't matter because he's not a big political person. So it exposed a lot of things on the way. And when things got really hard for me and I couldn't handle it anymore, I was running out of money and I was about to leave the country, he himself felt sad for me, and he told me, you could just film some younger guys, and he took me into Hollywoodgate. So things happened on their own. I could not sit here and say I planned. All what I could say is that I was patient enough, and when I was about to lose my patience, the support came to me from outside, and it made me believe that it's not what you plan that happens, it's what you're meant to do that happens. You just need to keep doing and trying.
And when you walked into Hollywoodgate, how in any way did it inform kind of the framing and the story that you wanted to tell?
I think from the second I saw on the gate the word Hollywoodgate, and how a CIA base in the middle of Kabul has the door with the word Hollywoodgate on it, and how so American that space is. I realized that I want to make this movie Hollywoodgate, and I understand that Taliban were looking for propaganda. The space is pretty much American, so much culture clash happening in there. So from the very first second I saw the gate, we wanted to make the movie Hollywoodgate. And we did not expect the story about the weapons and all of what was left behind and how the Taliban were able to fix these things. This was not the core of what I was expecting to find within this Hollywoodgate, but I was expecting to find things about the Taliban understanding the tool of propaganda and how they inherited that tool from the US as well.
And Emily and Julian, bringing you into the conversation, just like could you share with us the origin story of how you decided to collaborate on your film?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lisa. And it's so good to see all of our friends again. We've been on the road a long time together. So yeah, we're just so glad to be in such brilliant company. I'm a documentary filmmaker who spent the last decade telling stories about human rights abuses and geopolitical conflicts. I was with the Taliban before they took Kabul, and I was in Niger where there was human trafficking and smuggling, but I had never thought to turn my lens on my own country. I'm Canadian. I also grew up in a community of Holocaust survivors and their descendants, which kind of framed my worldview and asking these questions of why do we exact violence on one another? How do we survive? And what do we do in the aftermath? And yet I knew very little about the horrors that were perpetrated against the First Peoples of Canada and of the United States. You know, for 6 generations, Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families to 139 schools in Canada and 417 in the United States, where they were systematically abused and in order to, take the land. So when news broke in May of 2021 of potential unmarked graves on the grounds of one of these schools, I felt compelled towards this story. And the other thing that I felt compelled towards was Julian. Jules and I worked our first reporting jobs together almost a decade ago. We were cub reporters, randomly seated at the desks next to each other, and became fast friends. And in the years since, Julian became one of the most preeminent and incredible journalists, writers, speakers, thinkers on Indigenous life in North America. And so I naturally reached out to him to collaborate. Jules said he would think about it. And in the meantime, I went looking for a nation that said they were going to do a search. And I found an article in the Williams Lake Tribune about Chief Willie Sellers in the Williams Lake First Nation. I sent him a cold email, and the chief called me back that same afternoon. And he said, the creator has always had great timing. Just yesterday, our council said we need someone to document this search. So I talked to council, I got my gear together, and I was ready to go to Williams Lake. And that's when I heard back from Julian. And when Jules called me back, he said he'd be open to working on something. I said, great, I'm following a search at this school called St. Joseph's Mission in a town called Williams Lake. And he went silent. And that's when he told me, that's crazy. That's the school that my family attended, and where I heard that my father was born and put in a dumpster nearby, and that's all I've ever known. And what we would actually learn later is that Julian's father had been born at the school. So out of 139 schools in Canada, I happened to choose the one school where Julian's family attended and where his father's life began. And that was the beginning of an incredible adventure and storytelling together over 3 years, 160 shoot days.
Julian, at one point, did you decide that you would appear in the film?
It took a lot of consideration to tell a personal and family story. Obviously, Em and I didn't set out to tell a story about my family or myself. We set out to tell a story about this untold and foundational part of North American history, a cultural genocide that we have yet to grapple with, especially here in the United States, with obvious consequences in the here and now. But when when you get confronted with an investigation at the very school where you yourself have questions, and your father especially has questions about the circumstances surrounding his birth, it kind of lays a pretty significant, personal investigation before yourself and your family. And that's the circumstance I found myself in. So for the first year of production, I really grappled with that. In the film, you see my aunt, Charlene Bellew, who is leading the investigation at St. Joseph's Mission. She brings me to the barns and performs a ceremony where she asks me to take on the responsibility of helping to tell the story. So clearly she had some notion early on that I would be in the film, even though I was quite conflicted on that possibility. And then I also chose to move in with my dad at the ripe age of 28 as a, bachelor and filmmaker. I made the very glamorous decision to move to a small Navy town outside of Seattle, Washington, to live across the hall from, a guy who I hadn't lived with since I was 6 or 7 years old. Someone who I had to lend money to come to my own high school graduation. And it became very clear, while we were roommates, that my dad had lots of questions about his birth and his upbringing, and that I was in a position, if not to help him answer those questions, to at least help him ask them. And in so doing, to address some of my own lingering questions and pain and trauma from my abandonment, which ultimately went back to his abandonment, which ultimately went back to this system of forcibly separating Native children from their parents by law across this entire continent. And, in addition to that, I felt that if I was going to be, an author of this work, and all of these elders like the late Chief Rick Gilbert, who's also in our documentary, who shared an incredible truth about his own parentage. He was the product of abuse at the school, and he carried that pain and shame in his own DNA. And we actually followed him to the Vatican, where he confronted the leader of the Catholic order that abused 4 generations of his family, including himself. When people are trusting you with those kinds of truths, and you just so happen to be the son of the only known survivor of the incinerator at St. Joseph's Mission, at the school that we were following the investigation at, I felt ultimately that I had a responsibility to tell that story, to show some reciprocity, to put some of my own skin in the game when other people were giving so much to us. And I didn't know if that was going to be a good thing or a harmful thing, but I'm incredibly grateful ultimately that it was, a healing thing, and that it helped us, tell this story in a way that would convey the present stakes of these institutions, for Indigenous peoples all across this land.
This is a question for everyone. I'm going to start with Johan, and then folks just, share. I think some of our audience would love to hear about your artistic approach, the choices you made with archival, with music, with how you structured, how you shot. I especially want to thank you, Johan, for introducing the world to the story of Andre Boulin.
Another good one. Yeah.
I just think she's like my new superheroine. I just think
My God,
this fabulous woman who has the documents in her chignon should be hopefully turned into a feature by someone. But, you also, in addition to this incredible archival, you uncovered speeches by Lumumba in the Africa Museum in Belgium. And then you have this really interesting creative approach of using citations on screen. So can you give us a little background on all these elements that you pulled in?
Well, the citations are there because I knew I would get grilled in my own country. I knew I would get, investigated. So I even added a page number so people could at least say, or find the the sources and saying, look, I didn't say that. I just dug it up, and here is the evidence. But André Blouin is an very interesting story. Yves Blouin, she'll be very happy because she's actually looking for an agent to actually make the book into the film, and the book has just been republished. She was written out of history because she was a woman. Women were not allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to be part of the government. And I'm sure if that would have been the case, Patrice Lumumba, of which she was the speechwriter and chief of protocol, would have made her into a member of the parliament, even probably minister of education or something, but she would definitely have been part of the government. But here she is. She was written out of history, and she was very threatened. She was very outspoken, and she was a Pan-Africanist. She knew all the first independent leaders of Africa. She knew Abdel Nasser, Frans Fanon. She befriended Frans Fanon. She was also stolen kids. Mixed race kids were not allowed, so she was put in an orphanage in Brazzaville, fled then to Guinea, befriended Sékou Touré, the first independent leader of Guinea. And then through Sékou Touré, got to know Kwame Nkrumah, the first independent leader of Ghana. And he coined the idea of the United States of Africa. And so that became a very important idea to actually include the women. And she started a women movement. She was then sent to the Congo, became the advisor of Patrice Lumumba, the first premier of the independent Congo, and then started a women movement, had 45 members of a women's movement of 45,000 members. And I'm sure because it's just before elections that she for sure tipped the vote to the alliance that actually gained the majority for Patrice Lumumba to make the government. And that was boycotted. That was boycotted by Belgium, because what you see is the document that actually he gained the majority and she had to flee out of the country to make it known in the international press. But that was actually sabotaged. Even before he was elected, that was sabotaged because he actually chose that the riches of his own country should actually go back to the population. And that's why he was actually killed, not because he was a communist. He said, I was an African. But about the structure of the film, digging into the story, I could not but notice that actually music, and hence soundtrack to Coup d'etat, that music was inherently a historical agent in that pivotal moment, actually a political agent. And you have the two sides. You have, at the same moment when Patrice Lumumba is about to be, overthrown and then subsequently being killed, they send Louis Armstrong to the Congo as a jazz ambassador to win the hearts and minds of the global South. That was sort of a strategy, because you have to know the context is the 15th General Assembly. 16 African countries are admitted to the United Nations, including the Belgian Congo, is about to become independent, and it creates an earthquake, a political earthquake within that world body, where East and West are about to wrestle control of the General Assembly, of that world body. And so what the United States is about to do, Nikita Khrushchev, the then Soviet premier, is going to propose the decolonization resolution. The United States is going to send jazz ambassadors, but also arm twisters to buy up the votes, which are CIA agents sending into the General Assembly. They would send jazz ambassadors to the African continent. And you have this very schizophrenic sort of situation where the jazz ambassadors were still second-rate citizens. They were not allowed to vote in their own country. And so you have also that Pan-African connection between that wave of independence blowing over Africa that inspired the civil rights movement. And so the layering for me was, for example, if on the Belgian television, which is co-producer, you have We Insist Freedom Now album by Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln, the jazz singer, who actually initiated, and the film is bookended by the drum salvo that opens the film and the scream of Abbey Lincoln, that resilient scream of anger that doesn't agree with what the state of the world is, that actually in protest for the announcement of Patrice Lumumba's murder in the Security Council, that she crashes the Security Council with the Women's Rights Coalition in Harlem. And it's musicians that actually initiate that protest. But you have in 1964, We Insist Freedom Now album in its entirety on the Belgian televisions. Here you have the Belgians, the jazz buffs, in awe with that album. But it's 1964, it's the same moment when the genocide is happening in the Congo. And here you have music again, but what's wiped under the carpet is actually L'Empire du Silence, the Empire of Silence, where the genocide is not known to Belgium. And that's the layering of the film. It's like the music, but underneath something else is not said. And something we didn't learn in school, something that was actually, silence that we didn't know as Belgium growing up, because the other was out there. It was not the transatlantic passage that actually made that othering in the United States was part of the society. Articulation was very different. But the situation in Belgium lagged behind, and it's still lagging behind. It still is, actually. But that was the layering. That's sort of the layering of the film, that actually things are juxtaposed, and the music sort of would be, if the politics would be about divide and conquer, the music would be about how community comes about, or how it brings people together. And so while the music would step onto the political stage, we would treat politicians as lead singers to the jazz composition. So there was like this reversal.
Has the film been shown in Belgium yet? And if so, what has been the response?
Oh, yeah, it's been shown. And yes, in September, it's actually in the cinema, quite a surprise. But it premiered in Matonge, in the Congolese neighborhood, with Zatmama Maridon, who actually embodies the voice of André Blouin, a story that actually was never told. And André Blouin's story actually is still hushed up, because we were trying to get at the documents and at the secret service, the intelligence service in Belgium. And then they had found the documents. And then after COVID, when we went to fetch them, they had all disappeared. They said, oh, we can't find them anymore. And you see, it's still something that isn't spoken of. And you see that in Belgium, the discussion still lags behind. But there was a heated discussion in Matongi, in the Congolese neighborhood, when we opened in Vendôme, and the whole Congolese community was part of that. And so, yeah, it's sort of a lot of it shakes up the climate about the articulation about sort of Belgium's history, because it's so much part of how the country is built, right? So the whole makeup of Brussels is rubber money. It's still the layout of Leopold II.
Yes, the madness of. Brendan and Slava, at what point, I'd love for you to share about vision and structure, but also to talk a little bit about the amazing animation that you incorporated, and at one point you decided to make it a part of your film.
That's a really important question. So the animation, the structure are actually born from what's happening within Ukraine. So when Russia first invaded, they destroyed museums, they destroyed universities, and many, many artists were killed. And Anya and Slava, as artists, felt it was deeply important not only to produce their work as it's very autobiographical, as record of what they were going through, a personal testament, but also to put good and to put new art back into the world, to preserve that culture. Because in that regard, it's a genocidal aggression. Russia is not just trying to take territory, they're trying to destroy the uniqueness of Ukraine. And so in their animations, they told their stories of their past, peaceful times in Crimea, beautiful, incredible. The first days of the war, their present, what they were going through, and also their dreams of the future. And so the animations themselves became a time machine that could transport where we couldn't take a camera. And in this way, they actually became a deep part of the structure of the film. I mean, this is the largest conflict in Europe since World War II, and we had no time to waste. And so normally in a film, of course, we would want to shoot everything. We would then edit, we would then animate. We couldn't do that. We filmed, we edited, we animated simultaneously. And because we knew the animations were going to be these tenses within the film, they gave us an opportunity to have that structure through Anya and Slava's very work.
Slava, when you heard, you're on mute, that there was going to be animations, what, if any, direction did you give to the team, you and Anya?
So what is in Ukraine now? Every one of us told here and now about genocide, about kind of discrimination, about colonial war, everyone about totalitarian government. Every one of our movie is really connected to these issues. And in Ukraine now we have all of this connected in present. We have 1.5 million Ukrainian kids on occupied territories under pressure. Ukrainian language is prohibited, and Russia trying to rebuild colonial empire and to change, to destroy our identity. And these kids is future Russian soldiers for new colonial war, for new invasion. This kind of discrimination, all of this is really because totalitarian government is trying to take away our free choice, how to think and how to create. And it's so important now to rebuild our culture and bring back to this world as many art as possible, because this animation, it was amazing opportunity for us, not only tell about the terrors of war without showing them like a news does, not only tell about our past or speak about our dreams for a future, but make something beautiful and bring something beautiful even from the middle of this destruction, from the middle of this war. And we create these figurines. It's important part of our life, even in wartime. And Anya painted these stories on surface on these figurines. These stories connected to our story in movie, but anyway, it was not enough because it's just picture on porcelain figurines. It's kind of harmony. It's nobody need on his bookshelf porcelain figurine with something horrible. And animation gave us opportunity ruin this harmony and continue these stories to new direction. We still used Anya's language, her metaphoric language and her style, but it was something new. Animation studio Blue in Poland bring to life stories what Anya told, but never paint stories of what I told, what our subjects told about this situation. And we happy to have this medium, this kind of children language to speak about horrible and important things, and to share our personal experience in so beautiful way.
Angela and Natalie, I, so love your film. And one of the things that you incorporated was magic realism. Can you talk about how you brought that in as you were thinking about the overall structure of your film?
For sure. I guess we'll both answer that one. I think we knew at the beginning what we didn't want the film to be, which is like a top-down contextual film that would load you with a lot of negative stats about mass incarceration and the criminal justice system and 5 million children dealing with incarcerated parents in America. We really wanted to have this be a very internal, ground up film and really let the girls' hearts and imaginations and their souls shine. And a lot of times when we would talk to them, they would bring up their dreams and their nightmares, and they would be very whimsical with how they communicated. So it felt like the style of the film, in order to really connect an audience to what these girls were going through, was going to take that as the lead. And how could we create an experience for the audience that makes you feel like you know what they're feeling like? How can I bring someone in and let them just sit beside Aubrey on her floor and really just know what she's feeling? So that gave us sort of this idea that we could start threading the girls together through these glimpses of magic realism that were inspired by things that they talked about. So Aubrey, for example, when she really wanted to tell us about her father, she would run around the forest in the backyard and show us the memories that were so vivid to her. With Santana and Razaya, their moms would often talk about the storm that their girls were in and the phases of their storm. And then we started filming, and there was these like great lightning storms and this sort of like thread that was naturally happening between the girls. So those were some of the elements that things would present themselves as they were talking and then magically also kind of be in their settings. So that was some of that thread and through line started to take shape.
Yes. Yes. And what I would just add, because Natalie said it so perfect, is that these girls had just unstoppable imagination. And Natalie and I both understood when we first met with that coffee is that the girls would lead this entire project. And we started out, with only knowing that we had access to this jail and we wanted to make sure that we would cover this dance. But what we did not, I don't think, were prepared for was how comfortable the girls would be with the camera, because they actually shared with us how therapeutic it was for them. And then they were opening up with this unstoppable imagination that Natalie and I understood that if we were experiencing this, that we needed our viewers to do it as well. And then Kelsey Lou comes in with our score and just kills it, right? Mm-hmm. She brings you in as well. And for her to be able to do this with like a 2-week turnaround in improv, our score was just amazing. But what we also found in developing this film together, there's so many people that were a part of our project, although maybe incarceration was far from something that they experienced. What was not far from them and what was too familiar was that heartbeat and love of family. And so everyone was able to just pour their whole selves in, and not just their talent or their creativity, but their soul. And so that's what made us really understand that this imagination that the girls had was something that all of the audiences that would see this film needed to experience. And I think we captured that pretty well. The girls are pleased, and that's what mattered.
Ibrahim, we touched on it before that you arrive, you basically have to make your way after maybe some of the support, like with your fixer, was not there. So when I think of the making of your story, I'm like, oh my God, it's so tenuous. At any moment, the rug can be pulled out for you to be able to stay. As you were shooting, making the film, what was your approach to try to get as much as possible of being there so that you could have a film, no matter when the rug got pulled out?
I think my approach was a bit different. It was about how can I find my ways to stay longer, but not how can I record more. I didn't record way more. I wasn't rushing to record so many things. So in case they kick me out, I have a film. I was putting in my head, if they kick me out before there is a film, there's nothing I can have in my hand. And this is something I was putting them in mentally. So whenever they wanted to kick me out, I was like, okay, there's nothing here. All what I recorded is just gonna go to trash, because basically that doesn't make a film, and my job as a filmmaker is to make a film. So it's I put on myself this kind of restriction while I was filming to allow myself to find the ways to stay longer. So my brain is not thinking of, okay, now I have enough and I should run, but my brain is thinking more of how can I find my ways to stay here longer. And that helped us in the process of shooting to have a clearer structure of where we're going. And then when we started the edit process, I was very lucky to have then become supported with a huge team, like the producers of the film and the editors and the musicians, Shin Boris, Odessa Ray, Talal Derki, the producers, Adanas Georgiev and Marion Tour, the editors, and then we had with us Sahara Karimi, Dan Becker. These are names that were pretty much involved in the creation process and were really hands-on on the process. And we started to figure out how can we tell the story I wanted to tell initially in a much better way. And the structure started to evolve around how we all perceive war, how each one of us is perceiving war, and how is this story really representing them in regards to war, and how me as an Egyptian, Shane as Canadian and American, and Atanas as someone from Macedonia, and the others, we come from so many different backgrounds. And what was important for us is that the outcome of the story is something that represents the pain we all have from the war. So it doesn't become just a story of Afghanistan. It becomes more of a story of what happens when a nation becomes obsessed with war and becomes obsessed with weapons, and what happens when a nation invades another nation and claim to do this for the sake of making it a better place, and then at the end you just do the opposite of that, and you claim to do this to end terrorism, and you end up just making terrorism stronger. And we keep just seeing this being repeated every single day. So the structure we had was meant to tell that story, and then the story didn't really work with the Taliban on their own. We tried so many times to make it work without my character in the movie, and it didn't work because you would not sit for the first 10 minutes watch the Taliban on their own without knowing who's filming that, because you think they are filming themselves if someone is having such an access. So the team somehow convinced me, and I had to listen. I wasted a lot of their time refusing to put myself in the film, but at the end I had to listen to them. They are way more experienced than I am in putting my character just as a tool to lead the story rather than making it about myself. And the music was added then as a layer to bring the emotion of the cameraman. So it's not about my story there being told in I was feeling this at this moment, or I was feeling this at this moment by me saying it in words, but actually the music would add this layer of how I was feeling at this moment, so you can feel more for me. And we take the whole character of the cameraman at the end and throw him, in my mind, we throw him in the trash, because it's not about him at all. Who gives a shit about a cameraman that went to film with the Taliban? And we take all of the emotions that you've gathered for the cameraman throughout the film in the last shot of the film to make you feel for the Afghan people, because these are the people that matter at the end.
And Emily and Julian, there are these unmarked graves that are found, and you go on this journey to kind of excavate Julian's story, but also this bigger story of cultural genocide. We meet some incredible characters along the way, but this is not a finite story. So as you thought about filming and structure, when did you get to that place of we have what we need and we can stop?
It's a great question. I think that Em and I both have a journalistic background, and I think what was so brilliant about the conception of the project, which was, as we narrated earlier, came from Em, was that we were following an investigation, right, which created a clear narrative through line. What we could not have predicted, because we believed initially that we were going to be following an investigation that would lead to an excavation of unmarked graves, was that the investigation would actually unearth something entirely different, something actually until our film that had gone completely unreported, not only at this school, but at any school in North America. And that was a pattern of infanticide wherein babies that were born, some fathered by priests, were being put in the school's incinerator at St. Joseph's Mission, which begs the question, if this is true at this school in Canada, one of 139, as we said, what might be true at the 138 other schools across Canada and the 417 across the United States, where there has been no parallel reckoning like the Truth and Reconciliation process that we've seen in Canada. We also, of course, could not have predicted that investigation led by Charlene Bellew, my aunt, and the Williams Lake First Nation would intersect actually with two of our main characters' stories, with the story of the late Chief Rick Gilbert, who was the son of a priest as well as a former student at St. Joseph's Mission, as well as with my own father's story. So in a sense, two of our characters are also themselves evidence of this pattern of infanticide that is part of this broader system of cultural genocide that was, of course, designed to, in the words of one of the Canadian architects of that system, quote, get rid of the Indian problem. And I think that what we tried to do, and I think a huge credit to M and our director of photography, Crystal Marca, who M shoots, which, and she shoots really beautifully, was to also, not only do this important journalistic and investigative work with the film, but also, with the aesthetic of the film, which is, I will say, I think that their cinematography is absolutely gorgeous, is to portray, our people and this place as a beautiful place, which is, of course, inherently an aesthetic refutation of the history of colonization and the mission of these schools, which were premised on the belief that indigenous peoples were dirty, were backwards, that our way of life was supposed to die. And by showing indigenous peoples, by showing the people of Sugarcane and the survivors of this school as beautiful, resilient people worthy of epic storytelling, who come from one of the most majestic landscapes in the entire world, not only North America, I think that the film implicitly and forcefully refutes the history and legacy of these institutions. And there's so much more that we could say there, and I'll let Em add.
Yeah, I think that as Julian was saying, there was this idea of the journalistic truth, but what we decided was that this was a film about emotional truth. And that was just as important. It was also a film about spiritual truth, because the spirit world is taken very seriously in Native storytelling and tradition and culture. And so that inherently had to be true in our film. And the only way to do that was to live the story, not to extract interviews or push survivors to share in kind of confrontational ways, but instead to live alongside our protagonists as they reckoned with this incredible moment to excavate the truths from within their own recesses of memory. And so we lived alongside them and captured the most intimate and tender moments of their lives through building an incredible amount of trust. And we also had several ideas that framed how we wanted to tell the story. One was this idea of what happens when the ghosts come home to tell the story, right? What happens when the ancestors, when the kids whose names are etched into the barns, into the rafters of the barns, counting down the days until they could go home. What happens when they come home to tell the truth of what happened? And there was another kind of conceit as well, as this is a Western town, right, on the old Caribou Gold Rush Trail, where there's a lake, Williams Lake, and on one side is the town, and on the other side is the res, and there are cowboys and Indians and Indian cowboys. And how can we tell the story of a Western? And so we kind of thought of this as like a reverse Western, and the structure of the film begins with a stranger coming to town, which is Julian kind of coming home to help tell the story. And then we had to figure out how to weave 4 different character narratives with an investigation that ultimately ended up at this concurrent truth of what happened to the babies born at St. Joseph's Mission, as Julian described. And so to do that, we brought together an incredible team of editors, Nathan Panwar and Maya Daisy Hawk, our producer, Kellen Quinn, Chris and I shot, and of course, Molly Obamzawin, who creates a score. Molly is an Indigenous jazz musician who was able to take these ideas of, the feeling of Johnny Cash and Neil Young together with the kind of sounds of the Catholic Church and the traditional songs of the Secwepemc people, and bring them together in order to tell the story of Sugarcane sonically as well.
Just 2 things to add real quick, just because I'm all bottled up from listening to all the delightful answers of all of our other colleagues in the director's seats. I think that obviously a story about birth and children's being born at a school called St. Joseph's that was run by the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, the Immaculate Conception. There was obviously a lot that we did in the film about notions of conception and Catholic imagery and narratives, and subverting those, and also treating them with the respect that they are owed in certain ways by people who are, despite it all, still quite Catholic. And then I think, just to end on, I think probably an appropriate note for everybody here, because at least 3 of the 5 films are co-directed films, I think that it was a really beautiful opportunity for Em and I to collaborate. We both come from very, solitary journalistic practices. I'm a writer by trade and by economic subsistence. And, Em comes from journalism, where she was a one-woman show for her whole career, pretty much up until now. And, it was a really, really special thing. And I'm sure everybody else on this panel can identify with this, to get to work with somebody else who obviously believed in the power of the story, but also, brings their own ideas and skill sets. I'm kind of an ideas person, since I barely know how to press record in this space. And to see my ideas taken so seriously, and my knowledge about this place and my knowledge of this people taken so seriously, and then, translated into beautiful images by Em and Chris, and interwoven by our editors and everything like that. I mean, it's just a really, really special thing that we all get to do in this art form. And I just want to, say that it was the journey of a lifetime, and a collaboration that I'm going to be raving about for the rest of my life, that I got to work with my best buddy, Em. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone for our conversation. But I want to ask everyone if they've had this experience. So I believe that there are film gods. That's when you are making your film, there are moments that you just think it's all going to fall apart and the film gods come up. Or sometimes they come up when you are distributing your film and you meet someone that has been deeply affected and changed their life or opinion on a situation. This is for everyone. Is there a moment where the film gods came in and helped you and or your film?
I might add something in the spirit of what Julian was talking about, because you brought up this idea of collaboration, co-directing. And for Slava and I, we worked together on this film without speaking in the same verbal language the entire process. We never met in person. It was a proactive decision so that we wouldn't be there intruding or observing. It would be a story through Slava's own eyes and the words of him and Anya and the subjects in the film. But I think the film gods, so to speak, kind of shone upon us when we were working, and we were so frustrated we couldn't talk to one another that we started sketching, and these little sketches became storyboards and diagrams for shots, and we shared paintings and music and pieces of cinema, and we realized we were fluent in the language of universal art. And I think it is film that can bring us together. It is art, it is collaboration, witnessing each other's stories. And, Emily, you talked about this idea of emotional truth, when you empower people to be able to have a voice. And Slava and Anya, their art is already such a tremendous voice, but the film itself could become an active resistance against this genocidal destruction. And I think that was a beautiful moment, that we realized the language of film would be a part of telling that story in and of itself as a filmmaking methodology. So that was a very special little spark.
I believe that Natalie and our film gods are ourselves. I believe that we too showed up as goddesses because this spirit was in us. And as soon as I had about 30 filmmakers reach out to me, and Natalie was the only filmmaker that touched my soul. And that's because she said one thing that no other filmmaker said, and that was, how do we center the girls? And when we met each other, we immediately had a shared value around the girls. We had a shared vision, and we also really decided that we were going to make this happen no matter what. And we both had this strength of tenacity. And so every roadblock that hit us, every uphill battle that tried to disconnect us, we continue to stay the course. And I believe that both of us brought certain resources. We both had certain skills, and this film would not have happened without each other. It needed both of us on this project because of what we were able to bring before we knew each other. And then when we spent these 8 years, now 10, Natalie keeps correcting me, together, it just was naturally, as people would say. But I think that we had our ancestors and we had the creator and we had all of this already within us to make this project happen. It wouldn't have happened without both of us. And Natalie understood that although I was running the program, that it needed me to protect and uplift Black girls' voices, because that is rare, as we all know as filmmakers, right? I didn't have to be a filmmaker to know that you do not see Black girls in a way where they are celebrating themselves and finding their strength, no matter what that journey may look like on the outside, right? There are people that are trying to figure out what's happening with the girls. They're adultified, they're over-sexualized, they talking too much, talking too loud. These girls ran the show and people were in tune into listening to them. And only people who have that God-like within them would understand why you don't check the box and just do the film that everyone is used to, or the one that they say, this is how people depict Black girls. She understood that these Black girls had a voice, had dreams, had desires and needs. And then we really switched it around, showing the strength in the girls and the vulnerability in the fathers. And that is rare. And I do not believe that many people would have gone on that journey with me, nor with Natalie, because everyone wanted to tell this jail story. They wanted access. Even the first question I always get, how did you get into jail? Right? Not the question about how did you get the girls to actually just be open and raw in their personal selves. And that's because goddesses came into their life and made them feel like they were seen and that they were celebrated, and they became our family. And so I just believe that that is our journey. But Natalie may want to add to that.
I mean, that was really beautiful. Thank you. It's been such a long journey. I feel like we've had so many of our own spirits for sure drive this. And thank you, Angela. Like, this film would not get made unless it was someone like you, it's your life's work. And I signed up to tell these girls' stories with the most authenticity and integrity that I possibly could. And if you are working with families that are going through what they are, it's impossible for me to say, no, this is too hard. There's not a day on this film that I'm willing to say, this is too hard for me, when when these children are dealing with this family separation, and the trauma of having their parents in jail and not being able to touch them and having to pay for video visits. So I think that's definitely what guided me on so many obstacles. But yeah, there were times that were bleak. It took 3 years to get the green light to film inside the jail for the dance. Then we do it, and we don't know if any of the film will be in focus because the irises are filling up with tears, and our cinematographers are like, I don't know, this is too crazy. We're all crying. And then it's a pandemic, and we try to keep things going and lose our funding, and grants aren't going on anymore. So it was just getting harder and harder to keep it going. And then we get calls from the parents. Keith's got COVID. There's people passing away in the DC facility. So I was just like, holy, this is just a crazy project. We're just hanging on. We don't know where it's going. And after we all were getting told, like, a lot of documentaries are taking a break for a couple of years, leave it, go back, a few years later. I went to DC and I was pretty stressed. I was thinking about that I'd have to maybe tell the girls or Angela, it's just, there's no way to move it forward anymore. And Aubrey, being so intuitive as she is, just took me to the park one day and was like, Nat, you seem stressed. Let's walk the dog. What's going on? And she literally just turned the table and started seeing what she could do to lift me up, and what did I want to do next month and all these things. And I was like, you know what? If she just wants me here and she wants to keep it going and these girls are showing up, then we're going to continue and we're going to figure it out. So I truly think the spirit of these girls persevering through everything has certainly kept us going.
Well, there's your God.
I think for me it's the God came through the film God, as you call it, came through the whole process of me trying to control, and then everything I want to do doesn't happen the way I want to do, and I just had to let go to believe in the process as it is. Let it be in the shooting when I want things and they don't happen my way, and the things I didn't want are the things that are the most important. The things I felt I don't need to become the important thing. So it came into trusting the whole process from the beginning, and it keeps going all the way till the end. When we didn't get the distribution, I thought that the film is dead, nobody cares about it, and here we are today. The film is not dead, people care about it, and I know in 5-10 years, when someone mentions Afghanistan, mentions the Taliban, people might go back. Maybe the film sells in 20 years and it becomes money for our kids, you never know. But what I learned through this whole process is it's not about what you want, it's not about what you need, it's about you believing and trusting in the process. And really the thing that was becoming throughout the whole process to me is that you don't make the film makes you. And this was kind of the thing that drives me forward. For a DGA nomination, I never expected I would get something like that. I didn't even think about it. I didn't check the nominations, and then Natalie and Emily were the first ones to write me, "Hey man, you're you're nominated." I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because it's not what you seek is what you get, is what you get what is supposed to be meant for you. And I think this is the whole process about making documentaries, is just letting go and let the film God guide you through the whole process, I guess.
I think for us, I think every film feels like a miracle in some ways, right? But in the case of Sugarcane, this was a story that was buried for over a century. And what were the chances that we were sat next to each other? What were the chances that I happened to pick the school that Julian's family attended? What were the chances that what they uncovered in the investigation ended up being the exact story of Julian's father? And then moments throughout the film, making of the film, that felt nearly impossible, like getting access to the Vatican. That was a moment where the film gods, so to speak, or the ancestors or whoever were open doors for us. We had to sneak into the Vatican to get that scene because we weren't allowed in. And there were there were many doors that we had to kind of break down because the institutions of power, like the government, wouldn't release the records, or the Catholic Church didn't want us there. And through a lot of tenacity and hard work and partnership, but also through what felt kind of fated, what felt like a story that was destined to be told, that decided it was going to be told and sort of drew each of us to it. It became this kind of all-encompassing mission that we were all serving. And in that way, the whole thing really did feel like it felt like a miracle.
Yeah, I would just say that obviously the roots of documentary and certainly journalism, which is a big part of Evan Maya's background, are quite secular, but a story that was inherently about a form of spiritual colonization and then spiritual healing had to take seriously, spiritual truths and spiritual questions. And that just also happens to be a form of nonfiction truth that the traditions of my own people take quite seriously. And I think that a big way in which we went about this was ultimately spiritual, because it had to be. My aunt, Charlene Bellew, and the entire Williams Lake First Nation broader community would begin so many of the events that you see in the film with a song and a prayer, as is customary for so many First Peoples all across this land. And, as part of my own sort of process that you don't see in the film, I took on a commitment, ceremonial and spiritual commitment within my own community and nation. And every year I fast actually for 4 days and 4 nights with no food and no water, which is a long time with no water, out in the woods near the community that Charlene's from, called Esquette, which is one of the neighboring First Nations to my own. So I guess I hope that contributed in some way, because 4 days in the water is a long time.
Johan, would you like the final word?
Yeah, well, it's maybe history takes you on a lead. It's a story that tries to be told through you, indeed. And so for me, it was definitely the dialogue. It was like in The Elephant in the film. The elephants actually, I don't know, but it's a story by an acoustic biologist that actually every hour or so, which is matricentric, it's a matricentric society. And the grammar says, let's all stop like every other hour. And they all stretch their ears for 1 minute. And 4 days without water is maybe long, but 1 minute just standing still and stretching your ears to actually decide where you go next. And for me, it was listening. So open up the dialogue with all sort of, because of course, there's always the tricky thing of being part of a culture that was the perpetrator. And it's that dialogue that opens up, on both sides of sort of taking care of, do you not step over an appropriation and stuff. And it was the dialogue with Yves Blouin. Suddenly the serendipities of an undeveloped role of film that showed her as a 2-year-old kid, who's then taken as ransom, was André Blouin was pushed out of and chased out of the Congo, and she was held ransom. But the serendipities of finding that footage as a kid, the 2-year-old kid, and her mother in Kinshasa, or the footage by Nkole John Bofani, the Congolese Belgian writer, who also it sort of brought into the film in a way where things fell into place, or happy accidents that sort of twisted the story in a very different way. Or Conor Cruz O'Brien's son, who read his dad's story about the genocide in Belgium. And so it's that dialogue. It's actually the story. It's like with the novelist, that it's actually the characters that take you on a lead and tell the story through you. So for me, that's maybe the goddesses, because we have Leonie Abu and André Blouin. It's also the woman in this story that we're not told. And then history is wanting to be told through you. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you, everyone. Brendan, Slava, Ibrahim, Angela, Natalie, Emily, and Julian. I love your film so much. I wish there could be a 5-way tie because you're all so deserving. And for everyone who is watching, I just want to reframe something and say that I hope that we will let the cinema gods, goddesses, and divine non-binary spirits fill our sails as we continue to power forward and make films that have tremendous impact on the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good luck, everyone.